Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on 7 myths associated with public speaking. Peter Dew's my name. Most of you know me or have attended a workshop or have undertaken some coaching with me. I think that a lot of people hold themselves back with public speaking based on preconceived ideas, based on something they think they have to do or they must not do. They have to get right before they start public speaking. And the purpose of this webinar is that if we can dispel some of those myths, then you can move on with more confidence and more effectiveness when you do your next public speaking. As with most of my webinars, please ask questions as we go. Take notes, and remember I do record my webinars so you can observe them later on should you have any further questions or if I've moved through some content too fast. Today's scheduled for 30 minutes, but I suspect it'll be a little bit shorter, and that's fine. If we finish a little bit early, that's fine. Most importantly, I think, is as we discuss some of the topics, some of the myths, think and apply it to your own situation. What's holding you back? Are you standing behind something? Is fear of being judged or one of the myths the reason you're not speaking as much or as confidently as maybe you could? And with that knowledge, you can then apply it to a future situation. What are you going to do differently as you move forward and as you prepare for your next presentation and agree to speak at a conference or at a staff meeting? So ask questions, take notes. I'm going to record it and apply it. Think about how you can use this knowledge. Myths associated with public speaking. Let's start by defining myths. A myth is a widely held belief or idea, but false. So it's a widely held idea or belief, something we think to be true, but is actually false. So that's a myth. So when I talk about the 7 myths, each of these is often put up as a reason, something people need to deal with, an issue that's holding them back. But the reality is you don't need to deal with this. It's not fact, it's actually false. So let's get started and move through these 7 myths one by one. So the first myth is that we must be perfect. And we know about perfectionism and the way perfectionism holds us back, the trap of perfectionism. When you're preparing a presentation, it doesn't have to be perfect. What's more important is that it is authentic, it's genuine, and it's real. What's more important is that you have the audience's interest at heart and you're giving them a solution, a way forward, or you're helping them reach their aspirations. Perfectionists go over and over, preparing, practicing, and then they realize that it could be better. One of the reasons that I personally don't play chess is because I'm always looking for the perfect move. And there's so many options and permutations and combinations in the game of chess. And my brain's not that good, but I don't move, and I delay because I want to get the perfect, the cleverest move. If you wait until your presentation is perfect, you'll never start speaking. So you don't need to be perfect. You need to be clear of your message, and you need to be clear of why that message is valuable to your audience. Come from a position of servicing the audience and giving them a gift of your knowledge, and you will do well. Don't wait to be perfect, or you may never fire. There's a saying that we often use. There's many a best-selling book just waiting to be published, but it's not quite perfect yet. The author is not ready to release it until it's perfect, and therefore it never gets published. I'm sure you've got messages, ideas, knowledge that needs to be shared with your clients. Don't wait until you're perfect, until you're polished, before you start sharing those messages. Now's a good time to start. That's myth number one. The other myth is around your nerves and your anxiety. And I get asked this a lot. Peter, how can I be calm? How can I get rid of my nerves before I start public speaking? You don't need to be nerve-free. You don't need to be 100% calm before you stand on stage, before you start to speak. Many elite athletes, performers, talk about their performance anxiety and the nerves they take with them on stage as they start performing, speaking, presenting. Ringo Starr, the drummer for the Beatles, and the drummer for other bands since the Beatles, and a solo performer, has a nickname which is Pukey in the Sky with Diamonds. So Ringo Starr gets so much nervous energy, so much stage fright that he often vomits before he goes on stage. It does not stop him from doing a good job. The performer known as Adele, she was in Australia last year. Adele has really debilitating anxiety and nerves before each performance, stage fright. I, as a public speaker, also get very nervous before each time I present. It's not about getting rid of your nerves. It's not about controlling your nerves. It's about doing a good job. It's about sharing that message, your passion, with your nerves so that you can make a difference to those people who need to hear your message. If it's a health and safety message, if it's a provision of service for people with a child with an intellectual disability who's struggling, using your nerves as a reason not to speak and make sure someone's safe, or that some family finds out about some extra services, is not good enough in my view. We need to get those messages out there to the people that we want to influence, we want to inspire, we want to help, we want to change. And nerves is not a good enough reason to say, I shouldn't speak. So if you wait until you control your nerves before you start speaking, in my case, it would mean that I would still not be doing public speaking. Nerves are a part of public speaking. They're going to accompany you. Just learn to handle them, learn to be there, learn to have them with you as you do a really good job. The next myth. So you've presented really well. Now you turn it over to the audience, and we're talking about, sorry, I've just jumped one, and people think they must be free of ums and ahs and other filler words. No, it is okay to have some filler words. The problem becomes when your or your ah or your so, and it was really good, and what we need to do, is it's only if they become so repetitive that they become destructive. When you go to Toastmasters, sometimes they have counters of ums and ahs and other filler words. So you do a 7-minute presentation, then at the end of that 7 minutes, someone will let you know that you had 25 ums and ahs or you had 5 ums and ahs. Really, unless it's almost pathological, unless it's so repetitive so frequently that it is disruptive to the auditory learner, do not worry about the occasional and ah or other filler word. It's okay to have a few ums and ahs. Other filler words that can be more destructive than and are words that sound intelligent but don't mean anything, that people say over and over again. And I've heard some speakers who obviously think that what they're talking about is obviously so easy that obviously all of us are going to get it. And then as we go forward, obviously, we'll come to a much better place, and obviously that'll give us the outcomes that we obviously all want, obviously. The other word I hear often is actually, and actually when you think about it, actually doesn't actually mean much at all. And if I actually said what I'm saying now without actually using actually, then actually I'd sound far more intelligent actually than this constant use of the word actually. Does that actually make sense to you? I actually hope it does. Be aware of those filler words. Only if they're constant and repetitive do they become a really big issue. A classic example is when Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of JFK, was interviewed on live television. Now, Hillary Clinton had moved to become Secretary of State under Barack Obama's first term as American president. She left a Senate seat in the Senate seat of New York, and Caroline Kennedy was put forward as a very good replacement. But what happened in this first interview was she said 52 you-knows in about 10 minutes of interview. And some of the you-knows were 2 or 3 in a row. And I've seen it. You can look at it on YouTube. Caroline Kennedy, you know. You know, the Kennedys, they've always, been in the public limelight. So, it's only reasonable that, I should, put my hand, up for being the senator, for the people of, New York. It's only, fair, reasonable, that I do that. That was the end of her campaign. There was no further interviews, and an example of a filler word that became used so frequently it was destructive. How often do you use and ah before you worry about them? But I do know, and I've been at workshops over the last couple of weeks, running a lot of workshops. In every group of 10 people, there's 2 or 3 people that use ums and ahs very frequently. So if I count them in a 2-minute speech, there'll be between 10 and 15 ums and ahs. That's when I'd want to reduce it. So back to what I was saying before, when I lost my track, you've now turned it over to the audience and you're doing your question and answer. The myth is that I need to be able to answer every question. I must know everything. No, you don't. Do have a good understanding of your topic and be able to answer most questions and understand those frequently asked questions and be prepared, but also understand there will be those contentious or those difficult or those slightly off-topic questions that you may not be able to answer in front of an audience. You can take these questions on notice. Our politicians, our members of parliament, will often take a question on notice, and they are allowed 72 hours, 3 days, to get back to parliament with the answer. If you don't know the question, it's relevant to what you're speaking about, then you can take that on notice and find out and get back to the people. I wouldn't take 72 hours. I would try and get back within 24 hours. Don't make up answers. Don't pretend you know the answer to the question, and don't be disrespectful and shut people down and say, look, that's not relevant. If it is a question related to what you're saying and you don't know the answer, you probably know where to get the answer. And I think that's more important than knowing everything, is knowing who else in my networks of experts might have the answer to that question. If you're struggling with out of context, out of scope questions, make sure in the beginning that you set your scope, your area of what you're about to talk, and the area of which you're unable to talk about or comment on. And then if questions outside of scope, you'll just have a stronger ability to let people know that you don't have the answer. I'm here to talk about A, B, and C. I'm unable to talk about D, E, and F. If you let people know that up front, then when you go to question time, you're less likely to get a question about D, E, and F. So you don't have to have the answer to everything. One mistake would be to not have the answer of a valid question, and then in a week's time, in a different group, be asked the same question, and once again, not have the answer. So I use questions that I can't answer as a tool for building capacity. Really good question, let me find out. I'll get back to the group, to that person, and then I'll make sure that I've got that answer moving forward, so I never get stuck on that question again. Number 5, I need to know my content off by heart. No, you don't. You don't need to know your content off by heart. You are not reading a script. You're not performing in a play where the playwright has written a particular script, some words that you must follow. The best way to present is to tell stories, and I'll have a key message that I'm aware of, and I'll have 3 or 4 points within that key message, and I'll have 2 or 3 stories, 2 or 3 case studies that illustrate each point. When I tell those stories, every time I tell the story, it comes out a little bit differently, but that doesn't matter, because the point that I'm highlighting in the story remains the same. The take-home message from my story, and it's my personal story, it's something I've done or something I've observed or something I've experienced, it gives the same take-home message, but I just tell it in a conversational way, in a storytelling way. The detail doesn't matter. If you leave out a little bit of detail, as long as the story makes sense. So you don't have to know your content off by heart. That is a big myth. And what this enables you to do is to read the audience as you're speaking. And if you need to adjust or tell a different story or spend more time on one particular point, because you've got this ability to adjust and bring in another story or another example, then you can make your presentation more extemporaneous, more adaptable, more conversational, more targeted to the audiences, the various audience that you may forget. But preparation should let you know who's going to be in the room. And when I go to mining, Rio Tinto, BHP, Chevron, for example, oil and gas, I use a different set of stories than when I go to health, hospitals, disability, health service providers. So I don't know my content off by heart, but I do know my stories. So if I go back to something I said earlier about Ringo Starr, and his nickname is Pukey in the Sky with Diamonds, I'm not reading that material. And when I talk about you don't have to overcome your nerves, if I'm running a workshop on how to deal with your fear of public speaking and be a more effective speaker, I will always use Ringo Starr. The other person I didn't use is the story about Sally Pearson, gold medal winning 110-metre women's hurdles at the 2012 London Olympics. She was interviewed before the gold medal final and asked if she was nervous. And I'm just talking about this off the cuff, extemporaneous. The story, the words I have in my mind is Sally Pearson. And what she says is, if I didn't have nerves, I wouldn't be ready to race. And I say to people, if you don't have nerves, you're not ready to speak. So I have my stories, but I don't know my content off by heart. Sometimes I use the Pukey in the Sky, the Ringo Starr story. Sometimes I use the Sally Pearson story. Sometimes I use the Adele story. And of course, my story, my fear of public speaking, runs through all my workshops. So I don't know my content off by heart, but I do know the key points, and I do know the stories that I'm going to share. Being an expert means that you will be a great public speaker. It does not. Many academics, university lecturers are brilliant. They're world leaders, and they are not great public speakers. They hit you with information, knowledge, facts. They're boring. They don't engage you. They don't give you the so what, what's in it for me, and they just speak from an academic perspective, and they're not great public speakers. A classic example within the past 12 months was Dr. Benjamin Habib, La Trobe University, expert on North Korea, went on national television to speak about the nuclear bomb development of North Korea and fell to bits. Now, that's not to discredit him in any way or point this out. He blogged about this TV event and said it really scared him. He made a mistake by going on live TV. He hadn't done it before, suffered a little bit from social anxiety, and it all went pear-shaped at the live interview. Now, this doesn't diminish his expertise in any way, but all I'm pointing out is just because you're knowledgeable, you know your content, and you study and study and study and get your facts, and you're a walking encyclopedia, doesn't mean you're an engaging, influential, great public speaker. Focus on the other stuff that matters. And myth number 7, if I prepare great words, a great script, it's well written, then that's all I need. I think I've dispelled this myth already. It's the stories, it's the extemporaneous way of speaking, it's the conversational speaking that matters. And you don't want to read your script. You don't want to stand there and read word for word. You don't want to be perfect. We've already established that. And you don't need to know your content off by heart. So why have a perfect, well-written script? It's your eye contact that's going to engage the audience and read what's happening and work out whether you need to add another story or whether you need to spend more time explaining what's going on. You can't do that if you're reading from a script. Maybe prepare a script, but then drop that script down to a one-page bullet point summary or a one-page mind map summary. And then bring that up with you, but don't read it. It's there as your backup if you need it. And when people write scripts, they get into perfectionism and they think they're writing a best-selling novel. You're not. I prefer speaking points, bullet points, or a mind map just to guide me as I'm preparing a new speech. So they're the 7 myths. I must be perfect before I can present. No, I need to control my nerves. No, most speakers have nerves. I must be 100% fluent and be free of all ums and ahs. No, you can have a few stutters, some ums and ahs. It's only when it's so repetitive that it becomes distracting. You don't have to answer every question. Don't know your content off by heart. Experts are not always great public speakers, and having the perfect, well-written script is not all you need. Some upcoming webinars, a checklist to ensure your presentations are a success. This is about preparation, knowing your room, who's going to be there, who's in your audience, what audio visuals are required, do you need a microphone, a nice checklist, and I'll work through with that. How to reduce nerves. I spoke about not having to have your nerves under control, but what can you do to be a little bit more confident? So these 2 webinars are coming up. Running workshops all around Australia. Tuesday in Perth, winning presentation skills, assertiveness on the 2nd of May. Then we're up to Port Hedland, Karratha, Darwin, Bunbury. Lots of workshops there. If you need to contact me, there's my email, you know my website. And thanks for your participation, and I look forward to hearing from you. And remember, don't let these myths from public speaking stop you from being a great public speaker, sharing your message, sharing your energy with those people who need to hear. Thank you.